All right. Today we are talking about um, tilings, tessellations, how to find alternative endings to your origami tessellations. And I'm going to be walking through a little bit of the math behind a lot of these tessellations. So this is going to be a screen-focused video, and I'm going to be starting with like the basics of origami tessellations, that these are infinite patterns. So they repeat infinitely, which means they repeat at some distance and at some relative location, and then they keep repeating, which means that they follow certain symmetry rules. And those symmetry rules are defined by wallpaper tilings. And I'm going to bring up the Wikipedia article on wallpaper tilings. I'll go ahead and drop that link in the chat as well. And we can see so many different ways of repeating things. So I like to look at the crystallographic group names, and we can see, okay, we've got these different groups. Scrolling down further, we have different sample patterns, and all of the origami tessellations, if it matches the word tessellation, repeats in one of these ways. So there's going to be some symmetry involved. And then when we're looking at how to actually fold these, what I'm typically doing is folding with twists, which means I have rotating structures that are either rotating right-handedly or left-handedly, and they can be generalized by a tile that has the same number of edges as the twist has pleats. So there's one pleat per tile edge. And then you can go from there and say, okay, the right-handed twists or right-handed tiles need to be next to left-handed twists or left-handed tiles. They need to share the same pleat. So anytime you cross a tile boundary, you need to change from right-handed to left-handed or vice versa, which means that we're looking at two colorable tilings. And this I often show as, okay, we're looking at, let's say, the hexagons and triangles six-fold tiling. This is something where we say, okay, there's right-handed, I use red for right-handed, white for left-handed, right-handed hexagons, left-handed triangles. And if you just look at this tiling, it looks like the only way to plug in to this tiling is by picking one twist to go in the red hexagons and one twist to go in the blue triangles. But that's not the only option. So we can have all kinds of other things going on. I'm going to bring up the colorings and let's look at these in full view. So we don't have to do an alternating repetition style. We can color these tiles in different ways that don't have to do with the handedness so much, because we've already verified that the handedness works out, that with two colors we can alternate shapes. We never have two shapes of the same color touching each other. Then we can go into, okay, what if these next hexagons are actually positions of threefold rotational symmetry? And we can pull up origami tessellations, like let's say Chiva Rumbera, taking an example from this year's Advent of Tess, and say, okay, central hexagon has 6 of the same thing around it, but then that next hexagon out, I can use a different hexagon and have just 3 of the same around it. Now there's still 6 triangles that it's touching. The other 3 are just further away. And I can use that with all kinds of different examples, whether I want to use standard triangle twists like that one, or if I want to use hybrid hexagon twists, I can also have hybrid hexagons in that 3-fold position. So if I go to the next, the opposite side, you can see that's a 3-fold hybrid hexagon twist in that position of 3-fold rotational symmetry. So that's all well and good for generating the patterns that we're working on inside of Advent of Tess, for working on just this small portion. But it goes further than that. You can take that same inner portion, more or less, and shift the triangles that are on the outside, and now it repeats differently. Where now we have this outer hexagon in a position of 2-fold rotational symmetry instead of 3-fold. And the triangle is a position of 3-fold rotational symmetry. And then you can take those chunks, whether from the previous, so from this style where the triangle on the outside is the same as this triangle on the inside, or this chunk where the 2 triangles are different, and turn it into the next style of repeats, where I can take any chunk that has hexagons and triangles that I've taught in any of the Advent of Tess series, which has a central hexagon, the 6 central triangles, the 6 hexagons around that, the 6 triangles around that. I can take any of those patterns and choose to repeat it differently by taking a whole chunk and sticking it over somewhere else. Now this is still folded by doing a ring around the center and then a next ring around the center. But conceptually, if I'm looking at the crease pattern, what I'm doing is taking the chunk, sticking it over somewhere else, and then I have this triangle that's my position of 3-fold rotational symmetry. Now we'll be playing with this with actual crease patterns in a bit. I just wanted to point out that this is what's going on conceptually, and even this is not the only way to put chunks further out. I can put them further out so that I have a triangular block of a hexagon and 3 triangles in between these repeating chunks instead of just a single triangle. I can put them even further apart, so there's a hexagon directly between. There's this whole layer of hexagons and their associated triangles between these chunks. I can go even further with a different arrangement of these layers that doesn't have the 2-fold position in any particular hexagon, like the previous one did. So this one has the 2-fold position in a hexagon and a 3-fold position in a hexagon, which is harder to find a solution for because all of those pleats have to match up, and it has to be with the symmetry positions exactly in these relative locations in the center of twists, which is a challenge. So that would be a style that I would preferentially work from the outer symmetry positions in towards the center. But with this style, I just need that triangle to work out, and the 2-fold symmetry position is in a gap between twists. And we can go even further too. There's no limit to how far we can go with this. I actually proved this mathematically, that you can always keep spreading your symmetry points further and further and further out on this tiling, getting more and more new ways of repeating the same central chunk. And this is why I will never run out of alternate endings for my Advent of Tess ebooks. Like, one of the things I do in those ebooks is I take the chunks from Advent of Tess and I show you with crease patterns and photos what that would look like if it was repeated more times. And then I show you what that would look like if it was repeated more times in a different way. And sometimes many different ways. Like, one of the patterns this year has 5 different ways of repeating it. And that pattern is all in the hexagons and triangles 6-fold tiling. So yeah, there's so many options just in the tiling. And then we take a look over at the different options. Like, I can take one of these chunks, like let's say I have a hexagon, triangle, rhombus, triangle chunk, and repeat that in different ways. So am I going to have the rhombus between 2 hexagons, or am I going to have a second rhombus before I get to the next hexagon? Even that can be done in different ways. I can take this whole chunk and repeat it up so I have 2 hexagons next to each other, and then this triangular chunk is filled with rhombus and triangle twists. Or I can take that smaller chunk and say, well, actually, I want to have this layer of all hexagons around that. And that's something I can do. It's kind of crazy how, and there's way more options than that too. And like I was saying, with these little hexagonal chunks, like we fold in Advent of Tess, you can repeat it like this. You can repeat it like this. There's actually a lot more options also that I was playing with just yesterday, where, so this is one of the options I just showed you. This is the other, but there's also this option and this option and this option, which are using rhombus twists in positions of 2-fold rotational symmetry between the clusters. And then there's this option where you insert a rhombus directly between the 2 hexagons, like it's a hex-tri, rom-tri tiling. And you can fill in those triangle gaps in different ways. Like, you could throw some trapezoid twists in there, because why not? It's just all possible. And you can even do 2 layers of rhombus twists between things. And this actually is a pretty guaranteed way of getting alternate endings. Some of the other tilings that I was showing have symmetry points inside of twists, like for the 6-fold, the 3-fold, and the 2-fold points. And that's harder to guarantee. But with this, like, you can totally, well, the 2-fold symmetry point is between these 4 rhombus twists, and the 3-fold symmetry point is between these 3 rhombus and 3 triangle twists. So that, you're pretty guaranteed to get something that's going to work out, as long as, and actually, let's see, what conditions need to be true for this to work out. Okay, so as long as the pleat sequence for this rhombus, rhombus, rhombus triangle, as long as the spacings between those match when you run it in the opposite direction. So between these 2 triangles, or sorry, these 2 rhombi and these 2 rhombi, that's definitely going to match. What we need is that the spacing between the pleats coming out of these 2 rhombi match the pleats coming out between this rhombus and this triangle. And that's should be pretty straightforward to achieve. We'll find out in a moment, because I'm going to run through this with one of the patterns from Advent of Tess this year. So we talked about the symmetry requirements for origami tessellations in order for them to repeat at all. We talked about the connection between the crease pattern, the twists that are used, and the tiling. We talked about that branching tree of choices where you can always make some different decisions and get your pattern to repeat differently. We talked about alternative placements of symmetry points inside of one tiling. And now let's take a look at crease patterns. I'm going to start by bringing up the crease pattern of clematis. And I chose this pattern because it has some nice properties around the edges. So I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this one. So save a copy, and I'm just going to back it out to the whole tiling and call this clematis. Why is it saving as a PDF? I'm going to save the SVG as clematis playground. So we can look at a bunch of different options here and ungroup that guy and delete down to just one repeat. So this is the characteristic repeat for clematis in the third symmetry extension. And we can make this repeat differently in a pretty straightforward way. So I'll ungroup that by using a chunk of hexagon and triangle. So I'm pretty sure I have a file saved with all of the hexagon and triangle threefold chunks. I might just have it saved for the open hexagon and closed triangle. I think that's the case. But I happen to know that when I'm looking here and I'm seeing, okay, there's 2 grid spacings between these 2 mountain folds, and projecting this valley outwards, there's 2 grid spacings between those 2 valley folds. There's only really one combination that matches that structure with a hexagon and triangle, and that's hexagon on one side and triangle on the other. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up both the options where the hexagon is on the front and where the hexagon is on the back. So I'm pasting in my 2 different hexagon options, and I want to do this at the spacing where I get those 2 spaces between pleats, which means that I'm going to need to shorten all of the pleats that I'm going to use. And I'm not shortening everything else yet because I don't actually know which of my pleats need to be shorter. So I can group that together and we can see that this is going to slot in exactly where I wanted a new part of the pattern. So I'm choosing to slot it in that far so we can see a couple different options that result from that, because that's a particular special case where I can shift the pleats and get open triangles around a hybrid hexagon in that position. And then for this guy, I just need to make the pleats on the triangle shorter. To get those two spacings. I'll group that. And this can also slot in to the same places. It's just going to be a little further out. So all of these folds line up. It's just in the opposite orientation. So that is something that I could do if I wanted to add more space, but it's going to take more grid to repeat the central pattern. So I'm a bit more partial to this option. So if I take this and shorten pleats so everything matches up, I'm going to be, well, actually before I do that, I'm going to make another copy of the center, because the way that I repeated it around that triangle earlier, so if we look back at this crease pattern, it has the triangle in the position of threefold rotational symmetry, and so there's three pleats going out. Kind of the bottom of the three is the one going to the threefold position. I could have also chosen to have the top pleat going to the threefold position, in which case I would have a repeat out like this, and I'm just going to bring that up in a new file. So I can grab these, copy them over here. And if I'm repeating it this way, then what I'm noticing is that in order to get symmetry with this spacing, I would need an open triangle twist in there. Whoops. If I were to grab this and bring it a spacing closer, that would require a closed triangle twist. And then these two twists would be right next to each other. I think I like the open triangle better. And to show that that works, grabbing a left-handed open triangle twist and popping that in. So you can see there's two spaces between these two mountain folds. There's also two spaces here and two spaces here. That's how I know I've picked the right triangle twist. Then I would adjust the triangle or the pleats around the triangle to make things not overlap anymore. But for this guy, if we're exploring all of the different ways that we can have three triangles around a hexagon to match up, this way does work. We would need to extend these pleats a really long way, and then this is at a pretty dense spacing. This way, if we tie in this close, need some significant trimming of the pleats, which we can do trimming these and then all three of these. And so now that slots in nicely. And this is basically the setup for a open hexagon, closed triangle, alternating on opposite sides at 2 pleat spacing. So we've got open hexagon, closed triangle, opposite sides, 2 spaces between these mountains, 2 spaces between the parallel valleys. And that means that I can substitute in hybrid hexagon twists at will. So I could say, okay, I want, instead of a open hexagon with closed triangles, I want to have a 3-fold hybrid hexagon and open triangles. And I can do that as well. So in this case, the open bits are going to be in contact with the underside. So I'm going to adjust my triangle accordingly, and also my hybrid hexagon. And I think that's going to be shorter as well. I'll just go ahead and do that for all of them. So now when I'm sticking these triangles on, I should be able to, that's probably going to need to be a little shorter yet, but should be able to rotate that and have it slot in right there. So I need to shorten some of these other pleats to get it to match, but this is basically taking this same closed triangle, we've got that same spacing to the corner of the hexagon, but 3 sides of that hexagon have been tucked under, and that shifts the pleats for the triangle twist connected to those sides, turning them into open triangle twists. So it might make a little more sense if I superimpose these 2 options. We have the same pleats coming out of both of these, but we see different triangle and hexagon twists used. So there's lots of options when it comes to hybrid hexagon twists. And sticking that in there. So yeah, so many different options. There's a third option with these guys where we choose the other triangles, so the triangles that were already attached to the central cluster, and change those into open triangles. And a fourth option where we change all of the triangles and end up with a closed hexagon in the middle. But we don't need to go through all of those. Let's take a look at another symmetry extension instead. So we just did this one. I'm not gonna bet on the next one, but let's see what would happen if we went for a further one. And with this, all of these kind of light blue, grayish hexagons are not in positions of symmetry. So I can use whatever the heck hybrid twist I want. Let's say that I want to use Which one is more leafy? Let's say I want to use this P2 hybrid hexagon twist. And I'm going to copy that over, and actually I'm going to use a new file to make it clearer what I'm working on. So I've copied in that central cluster. That's the advent of test pattern. I want to use this symmetry. So I'm looking for one asymmetric hexagon to add, and then one triangle that's going to be in a position of threefold rotational symmetry. And from there, filling in these two other triangle positions just to make things work out. So if I have that P2 hybrid hexagon, and I'm always putting my hexagon next to the triangle twists. That looks interesting. So this is going to, so at this spacing, I would be tempted to put a closed triangle on the front. That seems like something cool. So I can grab my left-handed closed triangle on the front. And right now I'm not really adjusting the pleats because I'm not sure if it'll work out. And then I'm going to need a triangle in here, which is probably going to be a closed triangle on the back, but let's play with it. Let's see what happens if I do an open triangle on the back. Okay, that would match up there. And then if I group all of this and duplicate and rotate it halfway around, then my twofold symmetry point is going to be based on matching these guys. And I think tube pleat spacing is reasonable here. So from there, I can actually already tell you where the center of my threefold twist needs to be. So I can go up here and say, okay, that line from the sixfold position to the twofold position is going to be an edge of a special right triangle, and I'm going to duplicate that line and rotate it 90 degrees, sending it out that way. I'm also going to duplicate it and rotate it 60 degrees and scale it, let's say 150%. Want it to be, oh, I only needed to rotate it 30 degrees. So I'll rotate it back 30 degrees. It's like something's not adding up here. And that needs to be the center of my position of threefold rotational symmetry, given the setup that I have so far. And that is right on a mountain fold and right on a grid intersection, or should be if things are snapped correctly. that means that that's going to need to be another closed triangle twist on the front. So if I copy this guy and rotate it, that should be slotting in right there, which is not a very convenient spacing, but let's see if the rest of the pattern works out. So if I ungroup those guys and take a copy of everything I have so far, yeah, we'll find out. So a copy of everything minus that triangle, group it, duplicate it. I'm going to rotate it 120 degrees. So it should be matching up with what goes. It's rotating the opposite way than I normally rotate. So it should match up with things here, and it does not. Like some of it does, some of it doesn't. This triangle is a problem. So this triangle cannot be exactly where it was, and what that is wanting to make is a cursed triangle twist, which is not good. So instead, so I'll just get rid of all of that. Instead, what I can try is different triangles, different hybrid hexagons. Let's stick with these open triangles at that spacing and see what other hybrid twists can possibly go there. So finding things where the symmetry points match up, not always easy. Let's try this one, P3. Right, this sheet. And I can check, yes, all three of these pleats are matching up. And then if I duplicate that and rotate 120 degrees and find the matching spacing there, okay, that would give a nice threefold triangle. But again, we have the problem of what triangle is going in here. And so I think I want this pleat. Well, that still won't solve the problem if that pleat is there. I want this pleat shifted. It's still not solving the problem. But if both of them are shifted, so if that's a closed pleat and that's an open pleat, then I have, okay, that guy. I have one of these two. Now it's a matter of which one precisely do I want. Okay. I want this one. And I want it in that orientation. So if I get rid of those two, stick this, wait, that's not lining up anymore. Okay, let's try the tab. And wanted it that way. And nope. That is not the twist that I wanted. Okay, so as you can see here, fairly challenging to find the right match when you're going out in symmetry. Let's try instead to play with some of these other tilings. So particularly, let's aim for this guy first. So here I need a triangular cluster, this time with rhombus and triangle twists, that matches up with those tube pleat spacings. And I'm going to make an educated guess and say that that's going to be with triangles on the front and rhombi, or sorry, rhombi on the, okay. The rhombi are left-handed. Let's guess that that means they're going to be on the back. And triangles right-handed on the front. Educated guess. And putting these guys together at tube pleat spacing gets me this setup. And is that the orientation that I want? Early use of Control A. Let's double check. So yeah, that's a pretty good spacing for what I want to do here. And I can go ahead and shorten all of my pleats to match what's required. And then taking a look down below, I'm going to want that pretty close so that the triangle, so my personal preference is put it as close as I can, that triangle right up against the triangle hole that it's countering. And let's see, is that, yeah, that's an exact match on all counts. So I'm going to delete everything else, adjust this pleat, and yes. And I'll make another duplicate, rotate it a 1/6 turn. I had edited that edge, so I need to edit it back. And if I want to make the full pattern of this, I need to make the same edits on all 6 sides of that central chunk. And by the way, one neat trick, if you have the Advent of Tess ebook, is you can open the PDF, like certain pages of the PDF in Inkscape, and then you would have this set of clusters. And that would be a really easy way to start playing with these alternate endings. So let's say I bring up the Advent of Tess ebook and bring up the whole thing. I've got a bunch of really nice graphics of the different tilings, the different symmetry styles in the tilings in the ebook this year. And then getting down to, there's a lot of different tilings, getting down into the crease patterns. If you wanted to, let's say, take this daisy chain variant crease pattern, which is page 17, I could say in my file system, open with other application, Inkscape, and then say, oh, I just want page 17, and let's say, okay, that's what I want to open, and Inkscape will open for me this page. Now it'll all be on a single layer, but you can take this and ungroup it, Control-Shift-G, and then deselect the central repeat, delete everything else, and then you have that central repeat that you're free to play with. And that's exactly, and like it's the same exact size as all of my crease pattern templates that I have available for free on my website. And yeah, you can go and play with these patterns to your heart's content if you get the ebook at gatheringfolds.com. So back to playing with my rhombus and triangle modification of this clematis pattern. Now, if I take the whole thing and group it and duplicate, I can copy it over and it's going to exactly snap in. And I can copy that on all the sides. I can, let's see, it goes there. And one of the great things about using this tiling is that you actually don't have to worry about choosing, like, there's less to think about when you choose what grid to fold on, because the repeats are aligned with tiling breaks. I'll try and get this to actually snap where I want it. There we go. So now I've got my pattern drawn out. I can take it all and group it, and my file has this mask layer that I'm duplicating and using to clip, and there I see the pattern on 64 grid divisions. And so looking at this, I'm like, okay, I think 64 may be a good way to go, but I want to use a rotated grid. So what rotation should I use? I'm going to actually draw in the mask layer this line between two positions of six-fold rotational symmetry, those two closed hexagon twists. I'll make that darker so we can see it. I can see that line's going through grid intersections in my hybrid hexagon twist, so I don't need to count the full distance. I can just say, okay, on this grid line, I'm going 2, 4, 6 spaces, and then 1 space on this other grid line. So that's 6 and 1. X is 6, Y is 1. And my fraction, A over L, is going to be Y over X plus Y. So 1 over 1 plus 6, or 7. So 1/7 is my target fraction if I want to do a rotated grid to have things aligned with the edges. And coming back to the tiling, what I said about the repeats being aligned with the tiling breaks. So these hexagon and triangle clusters are aligned in the same column. It's not like this tiling where you go on the same column and instead of going through the center of a cluster, you're going through the outsides. The center's over in the next column. Here, the centers are always in the same column. And so if I were to fold a chunk of pattern, I actually have a true tiling break out here. I would want to fold slightly more to get this rhombus, triangle, rhombus bit around all of my sides. And I would need to figure out, okay, what am I doing in here? Because if I'm adding just this chunk, I might be cutting through some of my hexagons. So that's, you know, a question of how exactly you want to do it. But when I've folded patterns in this tiling, it seems more appropriate to have these chunks outside of the hexagon bits instead of leaving it kind of raw like this amount of drawing shows. So at the corners, so let's say that this corner is exactly the same as this corner. At the corners, you would have a third of the hexagon, which can be folded as a rhombus. And then on those edges, identical to here, in here, you would have half hexagons equivalent to rhombuses. And you could choose some alternative ways to fold that. So that's one alternative ending, or rather it's our, how many? Okay, we had the alternative triangle as position of symmetry version. We had the 1, 2, 3 that we drew with a 4th and a 5th options for hexagon as position of threefold rotational symmetry. So that puts us at 6, now 7 different alternative endings, none of which I had drawn crease patterns before or folded before. Let's go for another one. And let's go for this one that I said would be fun and has that boundary condition requirement, but no twists in positions of symmetry outside of the central cluster. So here we're going to be using rhombus twists and triangle twists to get the resolution. If we can get a layer of rhombus and triangle around our center with tube pleats going out, then we win, basically. So let's try this with our left-handed rhombus on the back, our right-handed rhombus on the front, and our right-handed triangle on the front. Because I know that our white rhombus is going to be left-handed, our red rhombus is going to be right-handed, our red triangle is going to be right-handed. So let's try those. Opening up a new document. And I mean, you can see I can go and do this for hours. It's something I'm very comfortable with. And this is really the fun part of tessellations for me, is figuring out these new designs. And I'm going to go and, whoop, we don't need the ebook page. Try and keep Inkscape from crashing. Grab a copy and come over here. So the reason why I chose clematis for these explorations instead of, say, carnation or mayapple or inlaid or some of these other hexagon and triangle patterns from Advent of Tess is because it does have those tube pleat spacings on the 3 pleats that are coming out, which I know from experience has better odds of making it when you're folding, or when you're using rhombus and triangle and other kinds of twists. So what we need, in looking at the tiling, we're going to have a left rhombus, a right rhombus, a left rhombus, and then a triangle, really mitigating the 2 pleats from left rhombi on these sides. So I'm going to have left rhombus, right rhombus. I'm going to rotate this 60 degrees at a time until it'll line up the way that I want. And then likewise, this guy, what I'm looking for here is these pleats are in the same direction and these pleats are in the same direction. So if I put my left rhombus there, my right rhombus there, it looks like I can put it even 1 spacing closer. Duplicate that left rhombus to there. Then let's see what happens when I rotate around and don't deselect everything immediately. Because I'm going to need the same spacing on all 6 sides. That's trouble. That is very trouble. Because I needed that pleat to hit this pleat to do the triangle. Let's see what would happen if I switch the sides of my twists. So if I go in here and I say, okay, my right-handed rhombus is on the back and my left-handed rhombus is on the front. And I take that and rotate. Take that and rotate. Wait, oh, right. Okay. Space that a little further out. So now, if I rotate that, put that there, now my triangle twists, my pleats are lining up for the triangle twist. And I can do a closed triangle twist on the front like I thought. But if I want, so I wasn't worried at all with the spacing between these two pleats. And let's see, is there any reason why those two left-handed triangle twists should be the same? No, there is not. Those are completely distinct positions in the tiling. Okay, that gives me some freedom. I could make that one a twist on the back. I mean, as it stands, the only thing I need to do to resolve this tension is change this triangle to an open triangle twist, shifting this pleat one spacing over and giving me tube pleat spacing here. I want to see if there's an alternative solution though. If I have that left-handed rhombus on the back for that other position and rotate until it clicks. Well, now that spacing is really far. But what does that look like over here is the question. Too tight on the triangle. Okay. Putting it back. Okay, so I'm going to swap out that triangle for the open right-handed triangle on the front. And now I have two spaces between parallel folds for each of these three gaps. And I can go in and start arranging. Like, it's going to eat a bunch of grid, but I already knew it was going to eat a bunch of grid. Okay, those are close enough that that needs to change. And on this one, that is going to be super close also. So I'm shortening that and that. I'm probably going to shorten the other one as well, but I don't actually know yet. And then that rhombus is fitting well there. We can solve all the problems with that one by changing things about this one. And it's these two sides. They're going to have to change. And that already slots in well with the triangle. And then I don't need to change those twice because I already changed them once. And I would like to see how I'm going to slot these things together. So I'll rotate this halfway around, and I'm going to be putting things together like this. Okay, so if I lengthen that guy and shorten both of these, that's going to get me on the right track. And I can go ahead and duplicate this all around. So I grouped that and duplicated, and now I can do exactly what I had found, which is copy them over. And this is going to be a pattern that requires a massive number of repeats, but we don't really care because we don't have to fold it at this point, we're just drawing it out. But if I did choose to fold it, I would need, let's see, so from that corner to get out past the triangle, 2, 4, 6, 8, at least 8. So 32 and 8, 40 gets me 80 grid divisions. I would need at least 80 grid divisions to get all of what is drawn folded. So yeah, not terrible in terms of things I've been designing lately. So I'll group that and use the mask to clip. All right. So that is an introduction to how I go about finding these alternate ending patterns for the Advent of Tess ebook, which if we take a look into that ebook again, I'll bring it up here just to see like how many alternate endings there are in the ebook. Like every single pattern has at least one alternate ending, whether that's a difference in spacing, like between dancing triangles and stars, groovy triangles and emergent hexagons, twirling triangles and isoclumped stars, or changes in symmetry. So pinwheels versus pinwheel cells, Chivarumbera versus convection, Jupiter, and desert rose, pinwheel forest versus nebulae. All of these hexagon and triangle sixfold patterns, like there's a lot, or whether it's different orientations of the hybrid hexagon twist, like wandering compasses, portals, and diamond anvil. These are all, yeah, different orientations of how you put in the hybrid hexagon, and then you can create all kinds of fun things from there. There's so much, so much that you can explore given these starting points. So even the patterns that go hexagon then rhombus, like this one, which is enveloped, which I do actually have a tutorial for how to fold more repeats of that pattern specifically. You can change that up to make quicksand, and it creates a whole new effect. So there's so much more to explore than the, if I remember correctly, like 63 patterns in the Advent of Tess ebook this year. And it's just mind-blowing to me how this all works out and how there's so many options, like way more than any of us can explore in a lifetime, than all of us together can explore in a lifetime. And yeah, I see your comment, Sushant, about like you want to work with this stuff without a degree. The level of expertise that I have on this really comes from trying things, just seeing, will this work? Not necessarily knowing this will work. Like we saw today, like there was a pattern, I was like, in theory, you could find a solution for this, but we're going to keep moving because this is taking a long time. And there's so many things like that where just from trying new things over and over again, you end up in these places that are pretty wild. So that's what I want to leave you with today. Just keep trying things, and you never know like what's going to work, what might give you ideas that can be useful elsewhere, and just all of these different fun pieces that can be pulled together to make new and exciting patterns, even just from simple twists. Like you don't have to use the hybrid hexagon twists. One other thing that I did want to show is some other tilings that I've been working with. And let's see if I can bring this up easily. There we go. So yeah, very similar ideas, except this time, instead of hexagons and triangles in the center, it still has that red, white, red, red, white, red on all sides boundary, but it's a double depth hexagon in the middle surrounded by trapezoid twists solved by rhombus twists in the corner, and you can do some fascinating things with those as well, some of which I was able to do with hexagons and triangles sixfold, but some of which are distinct. So that's even more fun that we can see with all of these different patterns. And of course, there's the rest of the file, which has a crazy amount of variation. But yeah, that's true of my other tiling file as well. I only showed you a small portion of the broader thing. And those hexagon and triangle sixfold patches, they don't have to be used in positions of sixfold rotational symmetry. You can use them in other places too. There's just so many cool things that you can do with twists, whether there's hexagons at the center or not. And yeah, the tiling diagrams here in the Advent of Tess ebook are just like, a taste of how we can get into some of these more advanced topics. So I'm seeing questions in the chat like, do I use Oriedita for making crease patterns? No, I'm actually just using Inkscape like I was showing today. And it's, yeah, Inkscape for me is great because I can use it both for generating the tilings, like these, and for drawing my crease patterns, like the ones we drew together. And yeah, it does everything I want it to do. So that's going to be all for today. You can find the link to the ebook in the description below. Happy folding, everyone, and I will see you next week when I will be folding a new pattern that basically came about like I was doing today, of like, okay, I have this base pattern, how can I create new options? How can I move the symmetry points further out? And it actually uses all simple twists, but in this really complex way that you wouldn't even be able to do if you're only using 16 or 24 grid divisions. You really need the 64 to get back to the repeats of the center again. So that's what's going on next week. Happy folding, and I will see you there.